Welcome to the FinTech Effect. This show is about innovation and the impact that FinTechs have had on incumbents and how they are evolving in response. I'm your host, Sue Britton. I've spent my entire career inside big and small FinTechs creating solutions for financial institutions. And in every situation, there are a few common characteristics that innovators need: passion, curiosity, courage, and the willingness to fail. My goal is to share wisdom for those innovating to help them along their journey. Hope you enjoy. My guest today is Theo Lau. Theo is the author of 2 books, Beyond Good and the Metaverse Economy. She's the founder of Unconventional Ventures. She's a podcast host. Her podcast is called One Vision. She is a startup advisor. You'll hear about a startup she's working with. She's a public speaker on diversity, inclusion, fintech, tech for good. Theo's very humble, so I'm going to brag for her. Theo has over 63,000 followers on Twitter, over 27,000 followers on LinkedIn. She's one of the most well-known voices in fintech. I'm so thankful to have Theo join the FinTech Effect. Hi, Theo.
Hello, Sue. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to have you. We should start with a bit of an introduction. And I was glad to hear that you were actually talking to some of our future, fintech minds in Canada at the University of Dalhousie University. But yeah, why don't you introduce yourself and then we can just kind of jump right in.
Awesome. Sure. So my name is Theodora. I'm Theo for short. My background, that's what I always tell people. I did not work for a bank, so please don't hold that against me. My background is tech, has been tech for almost 20 years. And then as luck would have it, I ended up doing a few startups, and then I was at AARP, which is, I believe, the largest nonprofit in the United States, looking at the well-being of people as they get older. And that was the opportunity I had looking at, healthcare is obviously important, and that's a more visible sign of aging. But my theory has always been, it's really hard to tell people you need to eat well and age well and exercise and all of that unless you have financial security. Money is always in the starting point. So that's how I got interested in what is the role of money as people get older, and what are banks doing and what are fintechs doing? And the answer was not a good one. I remember at that time, this is like back in 2015 now, most of the banks I would talk to, they would look at me like, retirement? No. There's more to life than retirement. We don't retire at age 50 anymore. And then when you talk to fintechs, they're like, yeah, we don't do old people. That was literally, I got told that a few times. We do not do old people.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, all right, kid, let me tell you something. Everyone gets old. And I think that was and still is a lot of the misnomer in our industry. When we think about, financial security and well-being as we get older, people automatically think about drawing down. They think about retirement. But there's a whole lot more because, we had gotten an extra 30 years of healthy living since the early 1900s. So are we working an extra 30 years? How are we saving up for what we need? And how are we taking care of our parents and our children and taking care of ourselves at the same time? We are a sandwich generation after all. And I did this recently. I was on stage, and as I was making the point, I reminded people I am turning 50 in a month. And my parents are late 70s, almost 80. My kids have another 8 to 10 years to go before they go to college. So think about me. I know the whole world does not revolve around me, but think about my needs, right? In about 8 to 10 years' time, there's going to be a huge change in my life where I need to plan for my longevity. I will be 60. I need to plan for financial caregiving for my parents. I need to plan for taking care of the kids.
Yeah.
So that hopefully they don't, get burdened with huge student loan debt. What do I do from now to then, right? Who can help me?
Yeah.
So that's my journey. And that's what I've always been passionate about. And a couple of years ago, I decided to start my own company. And The reason why it's called unconventional ventures. For a split second, I actually thought about doing a fund, and I realized that would just not be a good way of spending my time. Um, but I do like the word unconventional because I like to look at financial inclusion. I like to look at technology for good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's things that we don't typically think about, right? The needs for immigrants and women and older adults, people who are not banked.
Yeah.
And that's been my focus.
Well, I know a few people that who are focusing on the sort of the deaccumulation side of wealth, and how do you help folks like, yeah, I'm almost the same as you, except for I'm 5 years older and my kids are 10 years older.
Mhm.
So but my parents are the same age, and I'm in the same boat. And honestly, it's been a bit of a, like, whoa, this is going to be an expensive, challenging
Yes,
time. Yeah,
exactly. And we
yeah,
need help before then, not
yeah,
at the time when we're going through it, because that'll be too late, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's going to help us make the best decision from now to then so that we can have a higher chance of not going bankrupt. As
yeah. Exactly.
so
So you speak a lot, and those who are watching us on YouTube can see you've written a few books, and you have your own company. The sort of purpose of this podcast is to try and sort of help both ends. If there are only two, they're not. They're more than that, but of sort of the industry, the incumbents, and then the new entrants. And when I said there's not just two ends, there's tech giants, there's software companies, there's so many different players that can get into this space and are in this space. But um, I chose the FinTech Effect as the name for this because I think it really sort of symbolizes the pressure that everyone is under to change, caused by a lot of different factors. But um, what's your experience? Like, how would you sum up your experience, to date with whatever players, with respect to the FinTech Effect?
that's a really good question because I think so. First of all, I do have this question in my mind, especially more often lately, is what exactly is a fintech,
Mm,
right? When we think about fintech, we think about banks, we think about partnership between all of these entities. It's the word partnership that matters more than if you're a fintech, you're a big tech, I think at the end of the day, we all need each other. So that's
mhm,
the one. Now, when it comes to partnership, I actually like to flip it the other way around. There are 2 points. Is I think outside of the United States, there are some banks that are doing an amazing job that are partnering with different entities to be more successful. So those are good examples. On the flip side, I tend to look more from a fintech perspective. What are some of the
mhm.
fintechs doing that they're partnering with banks to deliver more value to the ecosystem? So that's always a fun way to look at it. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
Earlier, when we're talking about financial inclusion, we're talking about financial wellness and stuff. So recently, I just delivered a keynote at a payments conference, and one of my most favorite example. Now, caveat: we're not working together. I just love the founder a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, I always need to say this, but it's a company called Silver. So
Oh,
what they do is they look at personal finance, financial planning for people as they get older. Again, my sweet spot. But what they're doing is they work with both men and women. And some of the stats that came out from Rianne came from Wall Street. So she's worked in the industry for a long time. Some of the stats that she told me was fascinating.
mm.
Half of her customers are women,
So
which
she's the
is really,
founder of
yeah,
Silver?
she's the founder.
Okay.
Yeah, Rianne is the founder of Silver. So when she told me half of her customers are women, I'm like, oh, this
Mm,
is really cool because oftentimes we hear the preconceived notion that, oh, only men, right? They seek wealth management advice and women, they tend to stay in the background. But
mm,
half of her customers are women. Now, the even more interesting part is when she looked at the stats, for example, that she had with one of the credit unions, the member base of that group, I believe she said that women members were more twice as likely than men um,
Hmm.
to be widowed, single,
Oh, yeah, yeah, for
and
sure.
right. So if you think about that, and then you couple that with the demographics trends, for example, in the United States, where I think a recent study showed that people that are older than 75, there's like a huge hockey stick up going up for great divorce.
Mm,
Now, women traditionally we earn less. We have less Social security benefits
mhm.
because of that first thing. And now think about the effect of having your nest egg being cut in half.
Yeah,
They are the demographics that actually need more help than others. And I'm glad they're seeking help. And I'm glad there are companies like Silver working with financial planners to help this demographic because, as people age, there are more and more of them that's going to poverty, that's being homeless. And if there are tools that help them meet them at the right place at the right time, for example, you get
yeah.
divorced. What are the things you need to think about? You get widowed. How do you get your benefits? You want to move? Here are the couple of places you can think about that lower your cost of living. These are great tools that we
Mhm.
need to give in the hands of consumers.
Is the challenge, just dropped my AirPod. Is the challenge in the US, or maybe you can just speak to geographies you know about, like in Canada, there's not enough, sort of housing for
Hmm.
seniors if they can't live at home. And I can only imagine how much more challenging that gets for, you know, the spouse that, you know, lives beyond
Yeah.
their other spouse, or maybe isn't financially, aware of what they have. So when they get to that point, they may not even have any money to pay for, that stage of their lives, or getting, ill um,
Hmm.
at a
Healthcare.
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
healthcare. How do you pay for that, right? Like
Exactly.
in Canada, we're actually starting to get into the stage where we have a mix of private and public healthcare, because the public healthcare doesn't serve enough people. That's my opinion. I'm not a
I
healthcare
heard that
expert, but
actually last week as well. Yeah,
did
someone
you?
said the same thing. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it's crazy. So what's it like, in the geographies that you spent the most time in? Similar?
All of the above plus more. So I think, for example, in the US, the challenge that we have is multifold, right? I often say that inequality is a policy choice. I still maintain that years
Mm,
after. I
mm,
think a lot of what we see right now in the economy, in financial well being of consumers or financial well being of specific demographics of consumers, is the result of policy choice, right?
mm.
So we don't have pension, but we have Social Security. The Social Security was designed at the time when people were living, what, 60s until 60s, 70 at the most? And now we're
Yeah,
living until 90s. So that has to change because
yeah,
our policy has to change with how we live. But that
yeah,
has not, right? And so it is not, it should not be a surprise that it's going to run out of money. Um, and companies have gotten rid of pension in favor of, hey, you guys should all have your 401k because they
right.
want to tell people we want to have your freedom. Well, guess what? Less than half of the people have access to a 401k because you don't have the
Oh, wow.
infrastructure set in place to say you need to provide the benefits for people.
Right. Hmm.
And so a lot of companies do not provide the means for people to save as they retire,
Hmm.
nor do they have the incentive to do so because the structure is set up in a way that is a little bit convoluted and expensive. So
Mhm.
there's that. And think about the way we work with more gig workers, people taking freelance job, people who are doing semi-retirement and not full retirement.
Yeah,
That's also a growing group of people who do not have access to benefits. They don't
yeah,
have health care, they don't have retirement. So now we are creating more and more problems for ourselves, and we don't quite have a way to fix it.
yeah.
And if we take a step back and look at beyond this, we look at half of the population, women. Actually, I think there are more women than men in the US.
Hmm.
We don't have paid family leave. We are
No,
like the only developed
yeah.
country who does not have that. And I remember this. when when I took time off for my first child, I was on disability leave with half pay. I'm like,
Oh, interesting.
wait, what, why? I'm not disabled, first of all. I mean, I have a child, doesn't mean I had brain surgery or I was crippled. I'm not. I was perfectly fine. I just had a child. But so all of these
That's
things
funny.
compound how people are, and what they can get in the end. And recently, I just read up about menopause, which is another scary thing. And
Yeah.
that was the first thing I got when I did my checkup earlier. My doctor was like, "Hi, how are you? By the way, here's a pamphlet guide to menopause." I'm like, "What is this?"
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Right?
Yeah,
And I've
yeah.
seen you for a year. Lovely meeting you again. I started reading about it. It's there are not just from a health and biology perspective the impact, but also financial well-being.
Mhm,
Because some women have
mhm.
to take time off because the impact of it is so grave.
Yeah,
Most companies do not provide support, not from the perspective of paid time off, nor from the perspective of healthcare, right? You end up with unexpected expenses. And there are so many studies that I just started digging up that the financial impact for women is huge,
yeah, yeah. So
right? So,
so is this like is it just that, the aging population is not, an attractive segment to financial institutions, and therefore there's no time spent, kind of trying to figure out ways to serve them better, male, female, whatever? Or what's your take on that?
bias.
Mm,
Bias, one word, bias, ageism. I still think there is this inherent thing of thinking that you're older, you are decumulating, right? Like you say, we're drawing
yeah.
money out, and that just does not work with the financial model. And I would also say is lack of imagination. If you think about how
Mm.
we're living nowadays, so for example, Pew Research published, I believe last year, that they found out that there are more and more 20-something-year-old moving back in with their parents.
Yep.
60%, 60, of first-time caregivers are Gen Z and millennials. So think about banks, right? Financial institutions, or even fintechs. You're trying to go out and go after a demographic because you think, oh, they're young and hip and they'll gravitate towards digital banking.
Mhm.
You forgot about how they are and how they live their life as an individual. They're going back home to live with their parents. They would see things. They would want to help out. They would want
Mhm.
to probably help their parents or grandparents navigate this whole digital world. How do you do bill pay online? How do you make sure you don't get scammed, etc. That's an opportunity for us to rethink how we service this demographic. Think of them not as age, but think of them as a stage. What stage are they in right now? Or
Mhm.
thinking about, people who are in their 50s, they're starting up their own companies.
Yep.
There are plenty
Yep.
of them who are doing that, right?
Yep.
So what do they need in terms of, do they need a loan? How do we extend credit? How do we think about risk and
Yeah,
assessing
so
the
many
risk, right? So all
so
of
many
these
opportunities, right? Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. It's opportunities, not just like thinking about, oh, you're 50 and you're going to be like retiring and just drawing down money. No, I think the world is so much more interesting than that as ability to look beyond.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when that group is actually, bigger than some of the other segments of the market. Like, at the end of the day, I mean, I don't know that I feel like I'm not retired yet, but, certainly not spending any less as I
Mhm.
age. So,
Right? Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I want to go back to what you brought up, which is, this idea of partnerships being one of the real opportunities and that has come about because of the FinTech Effect. And can you, like, I know there are so many people who want to see examples of partnerships that have worked out.
Hmm. Yes.
Um, and so can you talk about, one, two, whatever examples of really good partnerships,
Yes.
and why they've worked?
I'll give
Awesome.
you two of them. So one of them is actually in the US. They are called Bond AI. So I'm the advisor. And I love, love, love what they do. They have been growing and adding different ways of thinking about serving people. So what Bond AI, their latest offering, what they do is they provide financial health score
Oh, okay.
for employees for an employer, right? So let's say your employer, you have 1,000 people that's working for you. And so what they do is they go and analyze how are they doing from a financial wellness perspective.
Okay.
And then they match the needs and the persona of each of these employees with their credit union or bank within the bond network. So within the bond network, they have partnerships with a lot of different financial
Oh,
institutions.
interesting.
So they look at,
Ah,
oh, what does employee A need? What does Sue need? Right? And
huh.
how can we mix and match what she needs so that we can give her a complete portfolio of products and services that can help increase her
Hmm.
financial well-being. At the same time, you won't be tied with a particular bank because that's
Right.
what we do, right? We have a primary bank, I still do, and I end
Yep.
up getting everything from them, which may or may not best meet my needs. And
Right.
it's too much
Right.
work to go out and find like 15 different things to mix and match. So what they do is they
It's hard to find, right?
it's
You and
impossible.
I can find lots of alternatives, but the average person certainly
It's time
can't.
consuming. You
Yeah.
have to, create different profiles and redo everything and research and all of that.
Yeah.
So they do all of that in the back end and they put all of that underneath the bond app. And it's of
So,
no cost to the employer, no cost to
oh,
the employee. And what it does is it provides an additional revenue stream and deposit for their partner.
that's so interesting. It's like another sort of acquisition strategy for
Exactly.
financial institutions. And so that's, I can't honestly think of an example of that I've seen
Mhm.
in
I have
Canada.
not.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, there's lots of, like on the whole sort of health tech side of things where, companies are turning to employers and saying, hey, you need to look after more than just the employee and
mhm.
the benefits that you're providing because you have to, look after their wellness. And so this is something that, oh, it's so interesting. And have it, like, did, how did they win that first financial institution? Or what can you imagine if you weren't sort of privy to that in the very beginning. But like, what is the sort of call to action for the financial institution? Because I'm sure they have all sorts of different things they could invest their time into from like companies that can help with acquisition. So what's the outcome that Bond AI is giving that they say, yeah, sign me up?
I actually have good stats that they shared with me. If I can find something,
Yeah,
because
for sure.
they actually just shared it at a as a presentation that they did
Oh,
within the
cool.
Bond Network banks. And what they did was they pulled. I'll keep talking as I open this.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
what they did is they pulled the stats from one of the credit unions that they work with. And it was actually fascinating stat because I
Hmm,
wanted to know, this was not the original product that he came up with. So they have
hmm.
been moved. So for one of the credit unions they work with in their network, obviously, revenue, right? And
Yeah.
deposits, that was one of the biggest driver. They were able to increase their deposits by 51%, which is
Oh,
huge
interesting.
because now you
Yeah,
think about bond as the means to help them acquire customers, right?
yeah,
And get
yeah.
additional deposit.
Huh.
And then they also were able to boost the loans for this particular credit union by 45%,
Oh, wow.
and improved efficiency ratio by 5%. So these were the stats that they pulled from one of their credit union. And I think the interesting aspect of this is we are at a time where a lot of these institutions are consolidating, right? They're
Mhm,
trying to figure out,
mhm.
okay, what's next? Credit unions,
Yep,
small community banks, they have pressure. They need to update their core system, right? Like even before we started talking, that was one of the things we chatted about. They
yep.
need to find new customers because a lot of their customer base are getting older. They're moving away from the community. So
Mhm.
this is an additional way for them to rethink community. And
Hmm.
I think that is the interesting part is like what you were saying earlier, we know employers are a great spot to help find bankable moments for the
Mhm.
employees. You start
Yeah.
a new job, you got a promotion, you have a milestone, you have a new baby, you need to change your benefits and all of that. Well, what
Mm.
more can we do? Because it's a win-win. If they are more financially secure, they have better employees too.
That's really interesting. So bankable moments that employers can use as
Mhm.
a way to provide more value.
Yeah.
Huh. Very cool. What's your second example of a partnership?
My second example is a green fintech. Actually, it's outside of the U.S. It's called Kogo. So it's Emma. She runs Kogo, and what they do is to provide a carbon tracker
Okay.
for consumers. So that's one of the things I always wish we have that in the U.S. For reasons that we're not going to talk about. But it's if I go shop at I don't know Sarah all the time, I want to know if this is a green retailer. I want to know if I buy these things, what is my carbon footprint? If I go visit this particular store all the time, what is my impact to the environment? And more importantly, how can I change to make it better? Right? Because I want to create a better future for my kids. So I want to take action. But to take action, I need data. And so what Coco does is it partners with different banks, for example, NatWest, which is one of my favorite out in the UK. And they provide this tool for consumers to let them know, here are your purchases. This is your carbon footprint based on your consumption pattern. And this is what you can do to do better. Here are some alternatives and options. That's great because they are not dictating you what you should be doing, but they're giving the power back to the consumers via data so that they can act.
That's cool. I mean, I think now more than ever, as we start realizing, the impact of climate change. I now live in BC, and we've had so much trouble with forest fires across Canada, but certainly within BC. I was listening to something as I was driving home from the airport yesterday that was talking about how, like, eventually it will be that they're going to need to invent new ways of helping us to be comfortable inside our homes as the climate gets warmer and warmer, and rethinking things like traditional air conditioning and heating and other things, and I kind of just went, wow, like you're actually, like, these are things that in my lifetime have always kind of remained the same. But that now the climate change is so bad that they're actually thinking about different ways to keep. I imagine part of the issue is going to be, certainly in some parts of the world, our air conditioning is not going to be able to keep us cool enough.
There are countries that's going to disappear because of the rise in sea levels, right? So think about the culture that we're going to lose. And oftentimes, sadly, these are the countries that can ill afford to. And that's the terrible thing. And what you just said resonated so much because over the summer, I spent 2 months in Hong Kong with my kids. And it got so warm. It was like 34, 36 degrees every single day, which is very unusual compared to when I was growing up in Hong Kong. It'll be like, I don't know, 26, 27. On a really extremely hot day, it will be 30, but you only get like 1 or 2 of those in a year, right? And most of the times it's mid-20s. And when we were out, it was so hot. And it was the same as we came back to DC. The skin felt hot, out. And it became unbearable. And my son and I, we were talking as we were walking. We were like, would we end up in the future where people will have to live underground? Because to keep warm. And I was so sad when we were talking about it. He's 13. And I'm like, maybe when he gets older, when he has children, his kids will not have access to the same things, to natural beaches and all of these things that we take for granted right now because the world is upside down. And
well, and you, like, when you, I have to admit, when you first mentioned carbon tracking, I've seen so many, not to name anyone specifically, but seen so many trivial use cases that have been put out there by, let's say, incumbents that don't really, I don't really see how they're providing meaningful value. But the more and more and more we actually get educated on, we collectively can make a difference, the more these things are going to become really important, right? Like, I don't necessarily want to live underground. I certainly don't want my children or my grandchildren Like you start to think about those movies that you've seen and you think, okay, well, at some point, actually went and saw The Creator a couple of nights ago, which, that's that whole sort of future where AI eventually, sets off a nuclear bomb in Los Angeles. And then eventually it's this fight between, artificial intelligence, robots and humans. And it's actually a very good movie. So I'm making it sound probably like one people won't be rushing to. But it does make you think like, oh my gosh, like the world's changing, and you can imagine some of these crazy apocalyptic futures a little bit more, realistically these days. Yeah.
Well, but I mean, like if you think about it, right? You mentioned forest fire. We all may not be living right next to the forest, but we could all feel the effect of the smoke. We
Oh
could all
yes,
feel the effect of our day-to-day
absolutely.
lives,
Yeah.
right? And so if you think about, and then you start backtracking, how do we end up becoming where we are right now? You can
Hmm.
you can be one of those that, well, I completely do not believe in climate, but you do get impacted by it. Or recently, the flooding in New
Yeah.
York from a torrential downpour.
Oh, that I saw the news on that, and it looked crazy. That happened in Toronto like a decade ago, and it was just nuts. Like
Exactly. Or just
people
recently,
abandoned their cars on the highways. Yeah. Yeah.
same thing. So all of these events that are supposed to be once in 1,000 years, once in 10,000
Hmm.
years now is happening every single year. So
Hmm.
we can deny all we want. I think ultimately we are in the business of moving money. We are
Hmm.
in the business of assessing risk and placing smart bets.
Hmm.
End of story. It doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're in. Your job is to make sure that we're still going to be viable 100 years from now. So how do we do that?
Yeah. And moving money at this point, whether it's about making a purchase that is, where you're given information, as you said, where you can help it to be sure that the impact on the environment is not going to be detrimental.
Mhm.
Like those are opportunities for financial institutions. As I say that out loud, I think, oh my gosh, who is actually going to do that?
It sounds scary, right? It's like heavy lifting.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think one thing that does give me hope is I look at, a fintech startup like Kogo, right? And they're able to
Hmm.
get partnerships with RBS, with NetWest, with quite a
Okay.
few banks in Australia. So they're moving along. Now, of course, we have billions of people on Earth, and just one person might not be enough. But it
Hmm.
goes back to one of the reason, I don't know if I told you the reason why our logo is a dandelion.
Oh
It's
no.
because dandelion seeds, they propagate and
Okay.
then they seed really fast.
I
And so
see.
if we can get the ideas spread out to have
Hmm.
enough people to be part of that, and to start changing our habits one by one by one. We
Hmm.
influence three people, those three people go out and influence five, those five go out and influence 10. That's how we
Yeah.
can change.
Is there one thing about these two companies that you've used as examples where they've gone through this, they've successfully partnered with big organizations? Is there one thing that they did that you think made a difference in their being successful in partnering with these bigger organizations? Because that's one of the biggest fintech complaints, right? Like when you see them, when they, many times you see them speaking and they'll complain about, oh, well, this market isn't competitive. Certainly not in Canada. It is not competitive. And so maybe it's not. And so maybe your only way to market is through, partnering or through, leaving Canada and expanding outside. So did they do something that you think, well, this is a good, sort of piece of advice I can share about how do you partner?
So Bond, they came out from an accelerator in Arkansas.
Hmm.
And through that accelerator, they got a lot of access to banks, community banks, and what have you. They're also always very active. I actually met them through Finovate
Oh, cool.
years ago. And so I think, every single little bit helps, right? Whether we like it or not, there's always a network. Same
Yeah.
reason why Silicon Valley startups oftentimes is so easy for them to get access to resources, to money, to people, because of the
Yeah.
network, because of where they are. So I think,
Yeah.
as much as I hate to say this, being at the right place at the right time, knowing the right people,
Yep.
is a
Yeah.
start. But don't do tech for tech's sake, right? Don't go out
Yeah.
and do something because you think it's cool. We have seen many of them who failed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need to find what people need. And
Yeah.
what they have been able to find is they found what consumers need, they found what employers need, and they also found what the smaller banks need. And so
Yeah.
they marry the three.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people are talking right now about the pivot needed to, extend the life of, the startup because they haven't maybe reached enough revenue or profit, or they can't raise anymore. And so do they have to kind of expand their view into the market and how they might actually be able to go to market differently, or,
Mhm.
serve different customers. So yeah, there's a lot of people that want, that say it's a very challenging time, but I don't know, for me, my glass is always half full, maybe somewhat overflowing. I just see so many great companies that I don't know that funding, as an example, is the only measure of success or growth in fintech, right? Because so
Mhm.
many of them don't get funded,
Mhm.
and they still make it, and are successful. But
I agree
yeah,
with you. I think we
yeah,
need to redefine what we call success, and not just startups, but also entrepreneurship, or also us as people, right? We have this notion, if you hit X million, if you hit this, you hit this is successful. But the world is so different and all of us are so different. You can't possibly just have one uniform, one size fits all. That makes no sense.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That would be awfully boring. I wanted to say this before, so I don't know if I mentioned this to you when we talked before, but my oldest son and my son-in-law live in DC,
Mm,
and they're not too thrilled with me, my husband and I, moving across the country to BC, because that's a much bigger trek. But the last two times I went to visit, both times I got heat stroke, and
hot.
it's so hot. And I used to, like, we had gone. They've been living there now for about 8 years, and my son-in-law is from DC. But it is just like, you go there in the middle of the summer, and it's like in the mid 30s every day,
Humid.
and humid, humid. It's like, and the combination of those two things, like, Toronto's humid, but this isn't.
Oh no,
It's
this is
it's it's like a 10x of Toronto. So yeah, yeah, climate change is going to it's going to make it interesting to see how people are going to live in those types of, sort of microclimates, because I think DC is a bit of a microclimate, right?
yeah, it very much is. I can see it in the yard. I've lost 4 trees already, mature trees, because they
Jeez.
are less able to cope with the drastic shift in temperatures. We used to have very full, distinct seasons. We
Hmm.
used to have feet of snow in the winter. We used to have beautiful long fall and spring. We didn't get snow last year. We hadn't gotten any interesting, substantial snow for quite a few years now. And this past year, especially, it stayed fairly warm. And so by February, everything was blooming. And so my
Hmm.
asthma kicked in. My asthma hadn't had an issue for 20 something years. And
Hmm.
this year I was miserable. I could not go outside. And I had 5 purifiers running at the house, constant, and I was on puff the whole time.
Wow. Wow.
And there's not much you can do. And then the trees start falling. Because
Yeah.
it's too extreme, right? So again,
Interesting.
it goes back
Hmm.
to risk. We are in
Yeah.
the business of managing risk. What do
Yeah.
you think?
You just made me think, okay, so the FinTech effect, in some ways, is the wake-up call, because, here are all these great companies in Canada. We have Wealthsimple, who's done really, really well as a startup. And now, they're a real threat from a wealth perspective and beyond. They're not just wealth, they're more sort of heading down that super app path. But that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is, you know, if you look at the world changing around us and changing everything, the future of, I don't know, where we live, how we get our, insert blank
Mhm.
food, where we vacation, like, all of those things are changing. And so maybe the FinTech effect is also like, a financial institution realizing that they can actually go in any number of different directions with
Yeah.
their with their sort of strategy. It's not doesn't have to just be about a better, digital, retail app. It can be help people dealing with, climate change and helping them to be more comfortable in their homes.
Or fund more transition, right? So there was a
Yeah.
report that came out that looked at, from a continent perspective, Asia is leading the pact in terms of funding transition because we know we need to transition to different forms of
Mhm.
energy. So there in itself is an investment, right? It is
Mhm.
investing in our future. And you talk about, where we live will be different. How are we going to treat the climate refugees? For those of us, for those people who have to move country, we
I've
as
never even heard that term before, climate
climate refugee,
refugee.
it's a real thing. And
Wow.
it's really scary. Think about people who got displaced, right? Where are they going to live? And if
Yeah.
they move to a different country, you know how hard it is to reestablish your financial services,
Oh, I haven't even moved to a different country. I'm in a different province and it's super freaking hard.
right? So
Yeah.
it brings to how do we think about wealth? How do we
Yeah.
think about digital identity? How do we facilitate cross-border payments?
Yeah.
Financial services in the middle of everything. Everything.
I have a client who's working to build more of a product capability inside of his credit union, and it makes me think that like the future of what product managers have historically done, which
Mhm.
is like, okay, here's my product, and I'm going to think about the future of this product, and I'm going to know what all my competitors are doing. Like, kind of a lot of that is going to just sort of fall away to what is your strategy?
Yeah,
Which customers are you serving, and how can you actually drive more value to
yeah.
those customers? It's not even really about the product,
No,
the core product, right? It's more about the experience. Interesting, huh? Well, I can't let you go without talking a little bit about some of the tech news that's out there these days, because I know you're like this world traveler. I watch you on, by the way, do you call Twitter X or Twitter?
I don't call it anything anymore. I call it the Bird app.
I can't call it X. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Anyway, but just seeing that you spend a lot of time seeing other parts of the world. But so Apple just made their announcement where they've implemented the open banking APIs in the UK, and they're now going to let wallet users see real time, um, uh, I
Balance.
guess account balances. So is that okay, no big deal, or is this a big deal?
I love it. So backdrop, I am a huge Apple fan. Caveat, I love Apple. I've owned the first Apple iPhone, every single generation of it till now. Our entire house is Apple, like every
Yeah,
so
and Star Wars.
and
Just to say, just let's be clear.
and Legos. So Apple
Yeah.
and Star Wars basically runs our house. So if you think about what they have been able to offer in the US, for example,
Mhm.
the Apple Card. When the Apple
Yeah.
Card first came out, people were like, "Oh, that's not fun. Why do we need another credit card?" But that's
Mhm.
the first play, right? And then afterwards, you get all your cash back.
Mhm.
Like, okay, so what? Everyone has cash back. And then they have the Apple savings account. Now you can
Mm.
sweep all of those cash back directly, automatically into that Apple savings account.
Huh.
And I tested this. I got so excited when it was available. So I signed up right away on the first day. I tested this. I was able to move money and fund the Apple savings account from my small business account from a big bank. Let's just say big
Yeah.
bank
Yeah.
within seconds. That was it.
Interesting.
But right now, if I were to move money from the big bank small business account to the same big bank's consumer account,
Yeah. You
guess what?
can't.
I have to write myself a check.
Yes.
And then
I know you can't.
I
Yeah.
capture. I'm
Yeah.
like, think about that experience, right? And that experience alone, like, oh my God.
It's
And on top of it, I get like 4.15% interest, right?
yeah.
So everything adds up. They just make everything incrementally better. They don't need to be the first one in the market. And so when you think about this, people are like, well, Apple's going to be a bank. No, they don't need to be a bank to provide
Mm.
what they need because they know what consumers want. And at the end of the day, They want data back from the consumers, and which is exactly the play that they have in the UK through open banking API. Now they
Yeah,
enable consumers to see across all their accounts, which is a benefit to consumers. And the
sure.
back end of it, they get data. Now,
Yeah,
David Rich, he speculated that their next move will be using all of that to better understand consumers and then to be able to provide digital identity, which if they can,
uh,
it will be brilliant because they started doing that in the US. We have in some states, we are able to actually have the identity in the Apple Wallet
yeah,
and don't have to carry a driver's license.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everybody is, it's like, you want to look at the crystal ball and say, what are going to be those three or four things that I'm going to use as a consumer that are going to be where I'm going to consolidate all my activity? And
Absolutely.
if my iPhone is where I can actually validate my identity across everything,
That's fun.
for
Yeah,
sure I'm going to use that. That's like,
exactly.
it's already something I don't leave the house. I don't leave anywhere without.
Exactly, right? And the only reason why I carry a wallet is because of my driver's license. That's it.
Yeah,
All my
yeah.
cards are there on there. And I remember recently I had to actually stop the card because I did something really stupid. Okay. And I had to have them reissue a virtual card number.
Mhm,
Did it
mhm.
in seconds. Done.
Hmm.
Because their actual physical card has no numbers. And so you can just go to the
Ah,
app and say, I need a new virtual card number. And boom,
very
done.
cool. So
That,
you use your Apple Savings account as a savings mechanism.
mhm.
And interesting. In the end, you can load it, whereas like we said, you can't even move money between your personal and business accounts. I can't even move money between my business and business accounts. Ugh.
I did not doubt that. I did not
Yeah,
doubt that, right? And you think how what time are we right now? 2023? Really? We have all these
I
things,
know. I
and
know.
yet you take a look and like, have we really done anything? I
I
mean,
wonder if Apple could solve the, aging demographic financial wellness challenge.
that would be amazing. I've been watching them add different things that are more geared towards family, right?
Hmm.
So I think maybe a year or 2 years ago, they started adding these things like, they can include mom as part of the family. They can get alerts. They can get, so I like the way they are thinking, right? And,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
fall monitor. So
Yeah.
those are geared more towards older adults. So if they can continue to move in this direction, since they keep collecting data about not just us, but about a family, like, we
Yeah.
relate everything about us, they have ability to, for parents to allocate cash allowance for children. So now
Yeah. Yeah.
instead of just cash and Robux, now I can actually give them Apple Cash. So
Interesting.
as they
Yeah.
continue to accumulate, I think they can do more for families. I
You know,
really.
for what we actually pay, I mean, setting aside the technology because that's expensive, like new
Mhm.
iPhone, whatever. For what we pay to Apple, they probably are arguably the one of the brands that delivers the most value back,
Oh, yeah.
right?
More
For
so
what you
than any
pay,
of the other streaming
right?
services, for example,
Well,
or
streaming, I'm thinking of
delivery.
even, like I'm not sure that I totally trust Google or I totally trust certainly not Meta or as we just said,
Mhm.
whatever the little bird.
Yeah.
But Apple doesn't have that
Mhm.
issue, do they? They
They have
actually
a
have
brand. They have a
they have more
brand value.
trust.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Well,
So I am excited to see what the
I'm not
future.
ad yeah, me too. I mean, I worry about any one organization getting too big,
Yes, I do.
but
Uh, so interestingly, one of the students at the university, he asked something which is not a bad question, it was an interesting question.
mm,
He asked if we look at, for example, the super apps in Asia and
mhm,
how, the Alipays of the world, they have so much data on a particular customer. And now we see the
mhm,
same thing um, in the US with Meta, with Google, with Apple,
mhm.
Amazon, all of
Yep,
these,
yep.
compared to governments
Mhm,
knowing what private citizens are doing and owning it. And he asked, what do I think about it? And I told him, I said, as much as I don't like governments knowing everything a private citizen does, because that's dangerous.
Yeah.
At the same time, I do worry about private corporations owning all the data about a consumer because they have no
It's
guardrails,
almost more worrisome, isn't it?
right?
When you just the way that you put it, like if you just did a survey question after you just said that, I would prefer government to have more data on me than I would a private
It's about
organization.
accountability, right? There's no one to go back to. What are you going to say? Like,
Yeah, and
is
what
that
part of the world you live in, but
exactly?
or what part of the world, but then also, what's your your politics. God, you guys just must be so tired of US
I want to
politics.
just go live in an island and just be gone.
Honestly, my husband is so fixated on the US politics, and I've tried really earnestly to really learn about it and understand it because I don't care. But and he's so excited about what's happening with Trump these days, and I'm like, I'll believe it when I see it. It's just been going on for so long, this insanity. Just
Tiring.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
something feeding that organism,
Yeah.
making it continuing to make it not go away. Anyway, it was really great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining my new podcast series. I really appreciate it. And is there anything you want to share with folks about, if they want to get in touch with you, what are some of the things that you can help with? Yeah,
Find me on LinkedIn. That
cool.
I am more often on LinkedIn now than I'm anywhere else. So just look me up and let me know how I can help.
Awesome.
Mhm.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Theo.